What's going on, everyone? So today we have a brand new set of spoilers, 4 new cards to talk about, which all of them look pretty reasonable, pretty exciting stuff. And of course, I just love seeing new cards. But we got to dive right into it because we have a lot of cards to talk about today. If you want to pick up any of these cards when they do release, when the set comes out, I do have a TCG player link in the description down below. If you use it, it does help me out as well as help yourself out. First off, here we have a 1 resource cunning ground unit in Criminal Muscle. It's a 2/1 underworld, and when played, you may return a non-unique upgrade to its owner's hand. Now, immediately this kind of screams like a disabling Fang Fighter of some sorts, except it's cheaper and it doesn't really have as impressive a stat line, right? But because it's cheaper, you probably aren't going to be getting an impressive stat line. A 1 resource unit, a 2/1 is at least something, and you are getting a pretty powerful effect. Remember, we're going into a set where upgrades seem to be a major theme, right? Whether it's going to be, upgrades you place on your own units, like your Jedi lightsabers, your Mandalorian rifles, or if it's going to be something like a wanted or a price on your head where you're playing upgrades on your opponent's units for you to benefit from the bounty synergies. Now, if we look at this and we look at some of the most commonly played upgrades, things like Luke's lightsaber, things like Vader's lightsaber, Boba Fett's armor, Mandalorian's rifle, all do not work, right? It's unique, non-unique upgrade that must be returned. However, that does mean that it works with shield tokens and experience tokens, which are the most common upgrades that you're going to find. It also works with random other, miscellaneous upgrades that someone might be applying, like, if they got a Jedi lightsaber on your unit, right? Because Jedi lightsaber is not a unique upgrade. And so it does work with a decent chunk of upgrades, the biggest one being probably the bounty upgrades. And while I don't really see a major use of, trying to bounce your Jedi lightsabers or something like that and applying it to another unit. The 2 uses that I see is, of course, bouncing your opponent's upgrades and sending them back on tempo and resources, or just completely removing like a shield token or an experience token, using this as a disabling Fang Fighter. You can also bounce things like Traitorous, right? These types of things, bouncing your opponent's upgrades and entrenched. These types of situations are pretty prevalent, but also, the thing for yourself is maybe bouncing one of your bounty upgrades that you've applied on your enemy units. So, for example, if you played a wanted on an enemy unit and something happens to where you can't kill that unit, you can't claim the bounty, or you played a price on your head or something like that, you return it to your hand and you play it on a different unit for some other purpose, or so for some reason you wanted to do that. That is something that I could see being somewhat useful. Or maybe you're just returning it to apply a bounty to someone else so that you can get the synergies. Like, let's say you have a Jango Fett and the bounty's on like this random 2/1 like a Criminal Muscle, and you're like, well, I don't really care about killing that, but I really do want to kill this other unit and I need to have a bounty on it, so that could have some synergies there. But I think the major thing that this thing's going to be used for is to bounce things like Entrenched, to bounce things like Traitorous, and to bounce things like shield tokens and experience tokens. It is quite good at that. Think of this as like your Spec Force soldier in Cunning, right? That's the way you have to think about this card, in my opinion, as you are using this not as your turn 1 play or anything like that. You're using this as a mid to late game play in which you are trying to, counteract your opponent's controlling strategy. Or, if we have a bunch of powerful upgrades that are non-unique, then maybe something else can happen there. Following that one up, we have another card here in Greef Karga. So Greef Karga, Heroism 2-costed ground unit, a 2/2 fringe official, and when played, you can search the top 5 cards of your deck for an upgrade, reveal it, and draw it. So we've seen this type of card very frequently. This is essentially the Mon Mothma of upgrades, except instead of getting a 1/3, you get a 2/2. Now, generally speaking, 2/2s are very poor in this game. You're going to be able to trade with basically everything, and you need to be able to really leverage the when played ability in order for this card to be good. Now, we do have a lot of upgrades, a lot of upgrade synergies, and of course, you can pick up things that are potentially free, right? There are some free upgrades in this set that can be useful on turn 1 when you play your Greef Karga. You search for, whatever it is, you play it like a wanted, for example, and then you get some really nice benefits there. I don't know if the 2/2 body is worthwhile to play this type of card. I know some people like Mon Mothma. I know some people like Tarkin. I generally speaking do not like those cards. I found them to be pretty ineffective, especially in the recent metas where you're trying to fight against control. And if you're playing like a Mon Mothma, which is like a 1/3, or a Tarkin, which is a 2/3, to try to search for something and then play that, you're not putting enough pressure on your opponent. You're not like actually threatening their life total, and that's something that you really need to be doing. It's the controlling strategies. And if you're playing against more aggressive strategies or mid-rangey strategies, well, aggressive strategies are just going to roll over your 2/2 body. It's just not good enough, and the fact that you're drawing an upgrade isn't going to be super relevant. In mid-range strategies, I think this is where, maybe you have the most use, where, you can actually leverage the body a little bit better and actually take advantage of the card without getting run over. But I just not a huge fan of these cards. I guess this is something that can smooth out your upgrade draws to find the perfect upgrade for the perfect scenario, and that could be something. But personally, this is a card that I'm not really seeing as a card that's extremely useful. Now, I will say this is the starter deck card. You can see with the S at the bottom right, which means that this is for your Mandalorian deck, because Mon Mothma is obviously villainy, and that means that clearly the Mandalorian deck is going to have a lot of important upgrades, because in order for this card to even be usable at all, you need a certain percentage of upgrades in your deck for this to hit. And so we can expect to see a lot of really cool upgrades coming in the Mandalorian's starter deck. We already see one in the Mandalorian's rifle, and so expect this card to kind of come along with a lot of other upgrades. Lastly, we have our two cards. Lastly, we have from Garbage Rollers here. The first one being Frontier Trader. We have a 3-costed Cunning Ground Unit, 2/2, and this says when playing, you may return a resource you control to its owner's hand. If you do, you may put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. This one's interesting. We haven't really seen a way to interact with resources by returning them to your hand, with the exception of like Han Solo or Lando Calrissian, rather, in our current iteration. We also have Smuggle and some other mechanics like that that are starting to come out. But generally speaking, the card like this is like basically like a mini Lando, right? A mini Lando. Now, when we're looking at a 3-cost unit, it's a 2/2. That is horrible. We do not want to play a 3-resource 2/2. I already mentioned we don't want to play a 2-resource 2/2. That's borderline. But a 3-resource 2/2, I just don't see this card ever seeing play whatsoever, as the stats are just too weak. Yes, there are some really cool things that you can do in the later stages of the game. When you play this, you can return one of your, Avengers that you resourced or whatever, something like that, that you resourced early in the game. Yes, you can do that. The problem is the downside of this card is so significant that I don't see us really taking advantage of the Frontier Trader. Even in the late game, that stalls you out by a turn, Frontier Trader, that is. And if you view this card as, okay, it's my late game engine for me to, recur some expensive value, just play a late game card, instead of this being, it's a way to return my Avenger to my hand. Just play like a Emperor Palpatine, and I'm almost certain that Emperor Palpatine just in this spot in the place of this card would be better. And if you want a cunning unit, let's just say like a Chimera or something, like, oh, this is going to return my Avenger or my Chimera later on in the game, just play another copy of that card in this place instead of Frontier Trader. There are some interesting synergies potentially with some other, cards that interact with resources, right? Like, maybe some tech synergies. Maybe you return a card that you resourced early because you have dupe copies and you want an Echo Trigger where you could discard a card to get another couple of experience tokens. I just don't see that being something that you want to do. Spending 3 resources to return a card to get another synergy from another card. It's basically like, if you all have played Magic, especially Draft, one of the common, sayings is don't put bad cards in your deck to make good cards better. And that's kind of what I'm viewing from Frontier Trader. Like, just play a better card instead of Frontier Trader. The next one is Dr. Pershing. And this one is the most interesting one, I would say, of them all, as you have a 2-costed ground unit, Vigilance Villainy, 0/5 Imperial, and his action is deal 1 damage to a friendly unit, draw a card. This is really, really interesting, as you just get a consistent draw engine, and you can deal 1 damage to itself. And so you can just deal 1 damage. It's a 0/4, draw a card. You could do some really cool stuff with that. Now, if you look, we have two resource ground units, 0/5s, that have an action to do something. One is more about exhausting your opponent's units, and this one's more about drawing cards. So it's kind of interesting to see the two of them. It is an Imperial, which is kind of interesting. So you can use a synergy with Tarkin to potentially infinitely draw cards if your opponent never interacts with it, because you can give an experience token to Pershing, ping Pershing rather, and then obviously you just don't lose any toughness because it pinged its away and it's got an experience token. Now, I don't think that this card is actually extremely powerful. There aren't really that many great ways to leverage additional cards, and you're playing a 0/5. The problem with playing cards without power is that your opponent can freely attack into them without any concern about losing their units. They will literally just not lose their units. They won't take any damage on their units. There's nothing for them to be afraid of. And if you're playing this as a 2-resource 0/5 and you go, okay, untap, ready up my units, I'm going to go ahead and ping Dr. Pershing to draw a card. It is now a 0/4. Well, 0/4s can be dealt with extremely easy with all the ambush mechanics going around and of course all the high powered units that we play on turn 1. You can't necessarily kill it without some other added benefit. But let's say someone goes Darth Vader blue, and they go Death Star Stormtrooper, ping your Dr. Pershing. You go turn 2, I'm gonna deal 1 damage to my Dr. Pershing, and they kill it with a Death Star Stormtrooper because it now has 3 toughness. There are a lot of situations like that, and in the totality of that conversation, you've drawn 1 card to replace Dr. Pershing, and you essentially gained 3 life because your the enemy Death Star Stormtrooper ended up killing Dr. Pershing. So would you rather just play something else on turn 1? Probably. So I'm not 100% sure. If we see a lot of synergies with dealing damage to potentially friendly units, like the card that I'm really interested in for this one is potentially, like some grit synergies, maybe like a Grand Inquisitor type situation where you can deal damage and get some value. And this way you could deal damage to friendly units and get some grit triggers, things like that. We've already seen a lot of grit cards coming into the game. The other thing to note is we do see some ways to improve the value of drawing additional cards simply because we have 0 costed bounties like wanted and cheap bounties like top target or price on your head. Like, these cards are very cheap and you can oftentimes play them in conjunction with drawing the additional cards. So pretty cool. I'm not 100% convinced by this, and apparently Garbage Roller's here. I'll leave a link to this article here. As they said, card draw hasn't felt as strong as it normally would. That's kind of my overall thought process on drawing cards in general. And that's what I've said basically anytime a new way to draw cards is. Now, if it's just a random additional upside, drawing cards is never bad, unless you're in a control mirror in some cases. But you just don't get to leverage the additional cards. So I'm not really impressed by these 2 cards. The card that I'm honestly most impressed with is going to be probably Criminal Muscle. While Greef Karga could be cool and interesting from the Mon Mothma kind of idea here, I just think that Criminal Muscle, the ability to have that disabling Fang Fighter type effect, or just even bouncing, like, can you imagine bouncing an entrenched after your opponents really thought that they were going to get you with the entrenched and be able to just hit in for some damage? Like, that type of situation could be huge. Or returning a Traitorous, like you're playing 1 resource card to bounce 5 resources worth of resources, or a card worth 5 resources. That's huge. And then you could potentially get in for additional damage, right? If they've Traitorous your unit, let's say that you ready up and you're playing Boba or whatever, and they Traitorous your Boba, and it's readied up, and then you go Criminal Muscle, bounce your Traitorous, and suddenly they've wasted their whole turn trying to steal your Boba, not only expecting not to take the 3 damage from Boba, but also to potentially be able to kill one of your units with the Boba that you've already that they stole, essentially. And you get to deploy to the board with a 2/1, and you get to exhaust your leader potentially to ready up a resource. So this essentially costs you 0 Well, actually, hold on, that doesn't work, right? Because boba requires you to bounce a unit, so that doesn't work. But you get to play 1 resource and bounce 5 resources worth of mana, essentially. So that's wait, no, that, I'm actually not 100% sure how that works, because trader is your opponent's unit is leaving. It's not leaving play, it's staying play, but just swapping sides. I don't know, actually, know 100% sure. I'd have to ask someone about that. But anyways, this is the card that I'm viewing as most impressive so far from the 4 cards. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, and I will see you all for a video tomorrow.